In 1995, philosopher David Chalmers drew a line that has shaped cognitive science for decades. He divided the study of the mind into two categories, the easy problems and the hard problem. The easy problems cover the brain's structural and functional tasks. These are the mechanics of science, mapping how the eye parses edges, how the cortex processes light, and how we produce a verbal report about a stimulus. But the hard problem points to a persistent residue. It suggests that even after every neuron is mapped, something remains unexplained. The redness of red, the painfulness of pain, and the sheer fact that it feels like something to be you. This creates a central assumption in the field, that subjective experience is an immaterial ingredient that physical science is constitutionally incapable of touching. It is the last redoubt of the ghost in the machine. This video explores the argument that the hard problem is false. We're examining the possibility that there is no explanatory gap in nature, only a gap between two of our own ways of talking, and that the most baffling mystery in science is actually a hallucination of introspection. The foundation of this investigation is physicalism. This is the observation that matter is fundamental. Every event in your head, including every moment of experience, is the activity of a physical organ built of the same atoms as a star. In this framework, information is not a second substance hiding behind the matter. Information is a way of describing physical arrangements. It has no existence apart from the substrate that carries it. If everything is strictly physical, consciousness must be a feature of certain organized systems. This suggests the hard problem is a matter of grammar mistaken for metaphysics. The hard problem relies on the explanatory gap, the feeling that a description of neurons can never account for a subjective feeling. The error lies in mistaking this conceptual distance for a gap in the physical world. We have a third-person scientific viewpoint for measuring neurons and a first-person subjective viewpoint for experiencing redness. These are two concepts of one event, not two separate events. Demanding the first-person appearance match the third-person description is a structural confusion. It's like demanding a thermometer read its own mercury. The brain's machinery evolved to model the external scene, not display its own wiring. It presents the world in a simplified idiom of colors. This works like a desktop icon on a computer. An icon hides lower-level machine code so the user can act efficiently. Treating the simplicity of an experience as proof that no complex mechanism exists beneath it is a failure to look past the interface. This architecture makes an explanatory gap a predicted consequence of how the system is built. The gap is the direct result of a self-monitoring system that cannot access its own construction. Once we close this conceptual distance, there is no ontological remainder. The feeling and the scan are just two modes of access to the same physical state. If consciousness were an immaterial addition, it should operate independently of physical chemistry. We should expect it to be an all-or-nothing phenomenon. However, the reality of anesthesia shows that consciousness is mechanically obedient to chemistry. When a measured dose of propofol binds to membrane channels, experience stops. Awareness follows a smooth dose-response curve, fading as drug concentration rises. This is the signature of a physical process being throttled, rather than a soul being eased out. This mechanical dependence is visible on an anatomical level as well. When you change the brain, the mind changes in precise, localized ways. If you sever the corpus callosum, the cable connecting the two hemispheres, the unity of subjective consciousness fractures. Two streams of experience emerge where there was one, simply because the physical connection was cut. Damage to the right parietal cortex can surgically remove the subjective feeling of owning one's own left arm. Experience is localized and disruptible in pieces, matching the brain's modular organization. Advanced imaging shows that shifts in subjective awareness occur in concert with these neural signatures. A property that exhibits this kind of slavish dependence on physical detail, its localization, its chemistry, and its fragility, belongs to the physical order. Some modern dualists attempt a mathematical rescue through integrated information theory. This framework proposes that consciousness arises from a mathematical quantity called phi, but this treats an abstract description as if it were a physical ingredient. Bits are just the shape of matter. You cannot get subjective experience out of a quantity any more than you can get wetness out of a number measuring volume. When these rescues fail, proponents of the hard problem fall back on the philosophical zombie. This is an imagined being physically identical to a human, with identical behavior and self-reports, but with no inner experience. It is dark inside. This thought experiment begs the question. It requires you to assume consciousness is a separable ingredient before you even begin the subtraction. If consciousness is the activity of those molecules, the subtraction is impossible. Stripping away the functional nodes of pain, the aversion, the attention capture, and the memory updates, leaves nothing behind. The word pain becomes an empty label for a void. Removing the storminess from a molecule-for-molecule identical hurricane is not an intelligible operation. The storminess is the organized activity itself. The feeling that a zombie is conceivable is a confession of how coarse our grasp of the brain still is. It is a gap in our picturing, not a window into reality. Proposing an absence of consciousness that makes absolutely zero causal or structural difference is a verbal magic trick. History shows a reliable pattern. Whenever we meet a phenomenon we don't understand, we invent an irreducible ingredient, which science eventually dissolves into mechanism. The most instructive ancestor to the hard problem is 19th century vitalism. For centuries, scientists could not see how mere chemistry could be alive. They insisted on a life force, an élan vital, that animated the body and sat beyond the reach of mechanism. Molecular biology advanced, and the mystery dissolved. No one isolated a life force, because life turned out to be a process of metabolism and self-replication. The question, why is it alive, evaporated, because the ignorance that necessitated the question was gone. This same pattern dissolved caloric for heat and phlogiston for fire. In each case, a felt explanatory gap was filled by an irreducible posit that eventually looked embarrassing in hindsight. The modern hard problem uses the same structure, a conceivability claim, a felt gap, and the postulation of an extra ingredient to bridge it. This pattern has held without fail for 400 years. Betting that consciousness is the exception requires ignoring every lesson science has taught about irreducible phantoms. Once the phantom ingredient is dismissed, we are left to work out what a physicalist explanation of consciousness actually looks like. Working neuroscience already sketches the form through theories like global workspace and predictive processing. In these models, consciousness is what it is like to be a physical system modeling the world and itself in real time. It is the running of a model, integrating data to guide action. These theories explain the features we once called inexplicable. Unity is the global broadcast of information. Perspective is the self-model at the center. And ineffable privacy is simply the fact that the system is running its own code. The final question of the dualist remains, yes, but why does it feel like anything to run this model? The materialist answer is that there is no bonus light added to the processing. The feeling is the processing, encountered from the only vantage point possible, being the system itself. This makes the boundary between the conscious and the non-conscious look like a fuzzy frontier of physical complexity, rather than a metaphysical wall. The hard problem is a door painted on a wall by a mind trained to expect a door. When we look past the illusion, we find only the brain, doing what brains do, in a universe of matter that was always enough to amount to a mind.